Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this one's going to be a special case because this is only something you can do if you have the right amount of characters, and I have no idea if it works for the other 5 elements, but it definitely does for a light element, so this is something to look into if you can do it, but there's a few requirements in order to pull it off, and I'll go over those in a second. But first and foremost, I should mention this one thing. There are some new stuff that has come out, and you probably can't use it in there either. Like, you could, but you're probably not going to do much of crap. That would be the Guardian raids, like the Guardian Plus raids, and then I definitely wouldn't use it in Tower of Malice because you're going to be off element. But it's something that you have to consider the right time for it, more or less. And then it's still a little bit of a luck element to it as well, so it's not always guaranteed to work, but the fact that it can work makes it pretty powerful, and it's very consistent too. But this is what I'm talking about is the quad full burst teams. Now, I've done a video showing it off, and I'll link that in the pinned comment, but I'm actually going to explain a little bit of how it works. Now, there are some things you absolutely need to get beforehand. One thing is definite. You need Yori's Lance. If you don't have it, you can't do it. That's because you need Yori to have these specific skills. And it only works if she has her Lance. You need to set her to have all 4 of these skills. Well, those 3, because you can't set the first one. And she has to have her Lance equipped. So you have to get Yori's Lance weapon, her soul weapon. It is the elemental attack one. And if you do not have it, immediately throw this out the window. Second thing you absolutely need, awaken Michael. And on top of that, she has to be able to have double set. If you don't have double series, you can't do it. And she has to be awakened. The reasoning why you need her awakening is because of this one ability right here, where if she gets a burst, everybody's burst gauge goes up. She doesn't have it normally. She only has it when she's awakened. So you need to be able to have that. Now, third character that is an absolute must, and you just need to awaken her, is Frey. With how her abilities work when she's awakened, that's why you can do a quad burst. Without it, you can only do up to triple, which is something to keep in mind too. You can do triple, but you won't be able to do quad. So the reason for that is this 4th ability right here, this Pervade Glint. You need to be able to use that and then use her first one. I'm not going to try and pronounce that, I don't know how, but that first one will become AoE and hits twice, which means it will be a 40 burst gauge fill. And the interesting thing about this 4th skill is the fact that once you use it, you don't have to do another one of these abilities immediately. You can save it until then. It literally turns her next ability into AoE. So that's something to know. But it doesn't work on itself, as it says right here, and it consumes 50 burst gauge. That's another reason behind the positioning, which is what I'm going to get into right now. Now, this is one of the easiest teams to use for the quad full burst, but there's others, and I'll go over why. Because you need this specifically, a character that can reach 90 burst gauge. And it may depend on double set or not, but a character that can reach 90 burst gauge needs to go in the spot where Lug is. The spot where Artemis is, somebody needs to be able to reach 80 burst gauge. Michael with her double set should reach 70. And Frey should be fine completely because thanks to Michael's ability to fill up extra burst gauge when she goes off, she'll give 30 to Frey. And normally you would need 100, 90, 80, 70, and 60. Thanks to that, you only need 40, and she'll immediately get that 40 between either Yori and Michael, or herself. So because of that, that's why Frey can be in the last slot. Doesn't matter what you put on her. But Michael filling that extra 20 still works even after everybody else has used their burst. So that would immediately give 20 to Yori and whoever's in the 2 slots in front of Mike. Now, 90 burst gauge characters. The ones that can do it, I know for sure, are Lug, EA, and Vishnu. In fact, I'll even go to my equipment tab and actually show those characters. But yeah, the ones that can absolutely do it is Lug. And it's very suggested to use Lug too because of the fact that she carries a defense down, which is just extra damage if it lands. So there's that too. The reason why EA can do this as well is because of the fact that she has this ability right here where she'll fill up her own burst gauge, and then the turn after it will also be filled up. So she'll be able to do it 2 turns in a row, and she has to be able to do it on her own. And that's also another reason why Lug works too, because when she bursts, this burst gauge fill goes from 20 to 30, and it's just enough to hit that 90. So that's what you need to do. And then the turn after, you can just use this to take the burst gauge fill off a cooldown and do it again. Now, going into the other one that can do it is Vishnu, and reason being is because of this one passive she has right here. Her burst gauge goes up by 10 every time she uses an ability, and she'll have just enough abilities in order to fill it up. Because remember, with the 40 and the extra 20, you'll be able to get another 60 on top of the 20 she can get to herself, or 30 if you save this ability, but you won't be able to use it 2 turns in a row. So Vishnu will need a double set if you put her in the second slot. Now, everybody I've just mentioned for that second slot does not need double effect if you're going to put them in the third slot where Artemis was. So Lug and all of them, they won't need double set. Well, Lug and EA doesn't need double set regardless. Now, someone else that can possibly work in that second slot, but it's a little bit random, is Iris, because of her sword buffs. She will need double accessories. It's suggested to put double accessories on her regardless of what slot you want to put her in, either second or third. But she absolutely needs it for second slot. But she can give burst gauge to herself every single turn thanks to this ability. And if she had a specific sword buff, and she already had burst a turn before, then it will give her even more burst gauge. So she can get 20 a turn that way. With the devil set, it will become 30 per turn. So that's where it will actually work. For the second slot to work, you need to be able to get 30 burst gauge, either with or without double set. At least 30 burst gauge every turn. You need to be able to get at least 20 every turn for the third slot. So everybody I just mentioned can still work in third slot. But additional characters that can work in third slot. Shiva, if you happen to keep her HP up, because she'll be able to do this right here. At the end of the turn, if HP is 80% or higher, she uses Untold Ray, and Untold Ray feeds her burst gauge. However, if you're going to use her, she still needs double set, just to guarantee it, because she can only use this Untold Ray on its own once. So, that said, she will need double set, and she can only be third slot. Now, somebody else that can also be, she can, and I forgot to mention this one too, Artemis can be second or third slot. If you put her in second slot, she needs double set. If you put her in third slot, she doesn't. And that's because of that one ability on her burst where it gives her 20 burst gauge to herself. So she's really starting off with 40 if she's in front of Michael. So there's that. So Artemis can indeed work with that as well. Now, another one that could possibly work in that slot is Tish. But you would have to use 2 abilities on one turn, save the third ability for the turn after. and she'd still need double slot, like double accessories, because she'll get 10 burst gauge every time she uses abilities. She'll have to do 20 worth on the first turn, and then 20 worth on the second one. That's how that works. So she can potentially be third slot. Now, that's a lot of explaining, but how exactly does this quad full burst works? Now, unfortunately, I'm not in burst time, but like I said, there's a video for that later on. But the way I tend to do it is this. I will use Frey's ability right here, her fourth ability, to make her next skill AoE. Now, if there's a chance that there's an enemy already raging or something like that, I might use this stuff beforehand. But you absolutely need to use this fourth ability on the first or second turn, and do not use her burst fill. So the first skill must be saved. Also, save Michael's AoE burst fill right here, which also gives burst power as well. Save that one. The first turn, you have a choice if you want to use Frey's AoE, but you absolutely just need the full burst. First turn, just full burst. Save any burst gauge fills you have, no matter what they are. Just save them. The only exception is Lou, because she can basically do it every turn. But after that first turn, if you haven't done so already, that's where you're going to need to do, of course, like I said, Frey's AoE, and still save this first skill as well. Use Frey's AoE by then. You will also have to use these 3 abilities as well if you haven't done so already. The 2 abilities that gives Ghosts the Yori, and then on turn 2, you would have to use this as well, Selfless Soar. Now, you can still use the Ghost things on turn 1, just don't use Selfless Soar until turn 2. Then you full burst like that. Now, here's where the situation is determined on what the enemy is in. If the enemy is raging, then turn 3, it's the perfect time to use this and get the 40 burst gauge to everybody, because it will go off twice and get 40 burst gauge. And if you use this AoE beforehand, like I mentioned, on one of the first 2 turns, then she'll have exactly 40 burst gauge, at least. So there won't be any specific timing or anything with that outside of enemies raging. If they're not raging, that's when you go into Encourage Inspiration for Yori, and then Michael's AoE burst gauge fill right here, which is San Michael, ironically. Now, you use those 2, burst again. Now, turn 4, what you didn't use is what you would do. So if you use Frey's burst fill, then you would use Yori and Michael's. If you use Yori and Michael's on turn 3, then you would instead use Frey's. Now, for both turns 3 and 4, your second and third slots need to be able to fill up their burst gauges on their own. You don't have to worry about anything if you're using Artemis, but Lug absolutely would need to use her own burst gauge fill. And it should be 30 with the previous stuff. Now, if you're looking for defensive debuffs, then potentially Iris can take Artemis' spot. And if you don't have a double set, it's RNG. But if she does have a double set and takes that slot where Artemis is at, then you can indeed do it. Like, for instance, I would have it like this. And that was leveling characters too, so that's why it's set up like this. But, for instance, I would have it like this if you're worried about getting the maximum amount of defense drops. Just swap Iris in there. Excuse me. The least restrictive setup would have Artemis instead of Iris. But Iris just needs a double set in this slot, and you're guaranteed to pretty much be able to do it with her. And you won't have to worry about the RNG on her own self buffs. But if you're not using Iris, then the safest one easily would be Artemis for that. And like I said, I have it shown in another video, of how it actually goes off and everything. Because if you set everything up correctly and you time it right, 4 full bursts in a row. But why I mentioned that you full burst on the first turn is because of burst time. That's also a requirement for all of this. If you don't have burst time, you'll still be able to do up to 3 full bursts within 4 turns. You just won't be able to do them in a row unless you hold off for a turn. Because Yuri would still need a slight bit more burst gauge in order to do it the next one. The reason why it works with burst time is because she'll fill up just enough burst gauge in order to keep doing it back to back. Because remember that Yuri goes past 100, she can go up to 200. But an extra little note that I should mention too is this specific Idolin right here. If you happen to have her, and she has to be maxed out, then that's additional full bursts. However, since it will take 5 turns in order to use her, then you will indeed have to wait if you want to do multiple full bursts in a row. That's more than 4. If I wait until turn 2 to do everything, like just push everything back a turn, then I can do 5 in a row with this, because I have a copy of her maxed out. You might be able to do it with 3 stars as well, depending on the burst gauges for everybody, but it's basically guaranteed if you have maxed out. So, that said, if everything's pushed back for a turn, I can literally do 5 in a row. And given how you can set up your Idolins, if somebody really wailed hard enough on the game, then they could have 5 copies of her in the sub slots without even compromising the main slot and do 9, maybe more in a row because stuff is coming off a cooldown. Which could potentially lead to, like, if you want to be honest, take a friend in the main Idolin like that too and just do like 11 in a row, but the damage would be horrible. I would suggest just sticking to a main Idolin that actually helps you out. In my case, Haggith, because my weapon grid's pretty strong. Now, last thing I need to note on this too is the fact that there are some exceptions to this rule where you wouldn't be able to do this. Like, if an enemy cannot rage, it won't work. Frey needs a raging enemy. If the enemy's not raging, it won't work. You'll still get 3, but it won't work. And because it requires burst time, it will never work in something like Tower or Advent. So, that's something to know. Only raid-based content. Like, say, Union event, or we have a raid event right now where you can do it, or even just the normal raids. Those are the only times where it will work, because you need burst time and it only works for that. A third thing I must mention too is the fact that it's still dependent on what an enemy can do as well, because some fights make it harder to pull out because an enemy might drain your burst gauge, or they just do a crap ton of damage. That's something else you need to pay attention to. But this is something I feel I need to mention because of the fact that when it comes to light element, they are very, very good at filling burst gauges. Not with direct damage, but with direct burst gauge fills. There's a lot of characters that can do that. Some to self, some to AoE, but they work very well together. And honestly, that's why I think some other elements might potentially be able to do it. I mean, fire is looking pretty good for that too. So is thunder and maybe dark, depending on who you have. Like, if you have AoE burst gauge fills, then you have a pretty good chance of doing it. And I know there's definitely some thunder characters that can self-fill pretty nicely as well. We'll get an awakened one that can do it 2 times in a row, so that will definitely help out for that setup. But I know for a fact Light can do it because I've done it in multiple ways on top of that. I mentioned the characters, go over the video slowly if you need to. But anyways, like I said, link in the pinned comment is going to have the video that actually shows it off. But this is just to break it down and explain it a little bit more with words. But it's something you probably want to try yourself just to see how well it works. If you're hitting the burst soft caps of like 17 million, and I say soft caps because you still need stuff like these exceed weapons. Like a Union event is definitely good for this, and then there's also the Haggith Glaive as well. But if you're hitting the burst soft caps, you might want to consider that. But anyways, that's all for this. I'm going to get back to doing some stuff in game, but it's something I wanted to bring up again and explain because of the fact that I just explained it to somebody else, and that gave me an idea for the video concept. But that's all for now, guys. More of this will come soon, and I do have to point out that this setup cannot be done on auto ability battle or AAB. You have to manual this. If you don't like manual, then don't even bother. But you have to manual this. But anyways, that's all for now, guys. More will come soon, and take care.